So to summarize, and with regard to the creation of the universe, Quran talks about 6 periods of creation, number 1. Number 2, it talks about creation of the universe out of an initial mass which was split. Number 3, it talks about the plurality of the heavens and the earth. Number 4, it talks about the interlocking of stages in the creation of the heavens and the earth, that there was no definite sequence when the heavens and the earth was created, but there was interlocking in the phases. And finally, the very intriguing thing Allah mentions in the Quran, that apart from the heavens and the earth, the existence of what is between the heavens and the earth. Allah is the creator of that. So this is what Allah says with regard to the Quranic description of the heavens and the earth.
We will now go on to discuss the scientific version of the origin of the universe. First of all, in order to understand how this universe came about, we have to first understand what is the nature of matter. Now, when we analyze matter, we can analyze it in 2 ways, a chemical analysis and a physical analysis. Now, by physical analysis, a scientist subjects matter to heat. In this way, if we heat a solid, it becomes a liquid. If we heat a liquid, it becomes a gas. Now, if we continue heating this, we find that matter goes into preceding forms in which it existed, prior to being the form in which it is. So we find that when we heat the gas, there's a burst of flame, and then there are molecules formed. When we further heat these molecules, we find that they're converted into atoms. And if we continue heating the atoms, we find that the atoms are broken down and then converted to subatomic particles, which is the protons, the neutron, and the electrons. And subsequently, if we go on heating matter, we find that it is converted into what is known as quarks, which are the building blocks of the protons. And we find that then, with further heating, we get the production of what is called antimatter. Antimatter, and then we find imperceptible vibrations of light.
Oh, Yusuf, let me just stop you there. What do you mean antimatter?
To get an understanding of what antimatter is actually looks identical to matter. It has all the properties of matter.
Yeah.
It has the same properties. It occupies space. It can be seen. But the only difference is that antimatter has got oppositely charged particles to matter. For example, that the electron is negatively charged, antimatter has what is called a positron.
Oh, I see.
And if you have a proton, antimatter has an antiproton, which is oppositely in charge. And where you have a neutron in matter, you have an antineutron, which is the opposite, which of course has no charge.
So does everything in the universe have antimatter?
They haven't found the existence of antimatter in our universe as such. But scientists have found the presence of antimatter being created in thermonuclear reactions.
I see.
Now, at this point, you find that antimatter is definitely has been detected, so it is a reality. But however, there is no antimatter present in the universe that they can detect. And we will soon explain why that may be so. So then we find that for every particle, there is an antiparticle. When we convert matter, mass, into energy, we find there's a tremendous amount of energy that is released. For example, to give you an idea in this kind of conversion, if we burn ordinary coal, only 1/1000th of the mass of coal is converted into energy. And now if you consider the greatest amount of energy released that we know of, which is the nuclear reaction in the sun, only 0.5% of mass is converted into energy. Now you can imagine if that is only 0.5%, what will 100% conversion be like? It is unimaginable. So we find that when matter and antimatter react, we find 100% release of energy. In other words, mass is completely converted into energy. So we know that mass can be converted to energy and energy can be converted into mass. This was given by the famous equation of Einstein, E is equal to mc squared. Now having this in mind, I must apologize to our listeners that this is rather technical details, but I think it's important for us to get some understanding of the creation of the universe, and I would ask you to bear with me in this. So, if you consider how did this universe then come about according to science? Now science can only provide us with some idea after the point of initial creation, the origination, because they do not understand what happened at the point of origination and how this came about. So they say they have what is called the Big Bang Theory, which was initially formulated in 1949 and which has gained reasonable acceptance amongst most scientists and is a reasonably well-established theory, I may add.
If I may just add, it was mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago, the verse I referred to, Surah 21, verse 30, where the primary process of Allah says, Allah, do not unbelievers see that heavens and earth are once joined together as one unit of creation until we clove them asunder, a fact which was borne out 1400 years ago. So
absolutely, amazing. So they say that we can only look at a point after the initial point of creation, or after the actual Big Bang as it is come to be known. And we start at a point which is at 10 millionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second after the Big Bang. That is 10 to the minus 42 seconds. Now the time interval there is so important because the universe has been created in such great magnitude after the point of creation that every fraction of a second is so vital, and we shall see how every fraction of a second led to the development of the universe. So we say that at this point the universe was a point of near infinite density of energy, about the size of a fraction of a size of a proton. Now a proton is so minute which cannot be seen by even the most fanciest microscopes we may have today. And this is, to give an idea, about 10 to the minus 24 centimeters. It's inconceivable how small that is. But this is the origin of the universe as it is said. Now at this point the temperature of matter, of this energy, was 100 million trillion degrees, 10 to the 32 degrees, just to give you some idea of the phenomenal energy that was involved at this stage. Now at this stage there was no matter. There was just what they call space-time being created. Remember, there was no space and there was no time before. So at this point space-time was created and matter was not yet in existence. I hope you are following me. I will try and keep it as simple as is reasonably enough.
you mean that was a simple explanation?
Now we see that after the temperature has dropped, this is at 100 million trillion degrees, which is 10 to the 32 degrees. There's only matter, there's only energy and no matter. Now as a result of these forces that caused the initial explosion, this point began to inflate and grow very rapidly, accelerating in its expansion with inflation. And the temperature then dropped to 10 to the 27 degrees, which is still phenomenal temperatures, mind you. At this point we find that matter undergoes a transformation. From energy we get the production of what is called the fundamental particles. Now these are the particles which make up the protons and the neutrons. These are still subparticles which are regarded for the sake of simplicity, we may call them just quarks and anti-quarks, or there are innumerable of them. But anyway, there's the production of what is called as matter and antimatter at this stage, and lots of radiation. Now at 10,000th of a second we find that matter and antimatter are combining and annihilating each other at the same time, because we know when matter and antimatter combine, they annihilate and there's nothing again. But we find that at this point, for some reason unknown to science, that there was a preference for a greater amount of matter over antimatter. There was some violation of the normal laws that they can understand. And we find that 1 part in a billion of matter over antimatter was left. So this is really phenomenal. And from this we find the quarks form the protons and the neutrons. Now after 1 minute, this is 1 minute after the initial point of creation, 1 minute mind you, so much has already been done. We find the temperature has fallen to 10 to the 9th degrees, which is 1,000 million degrees. We find that now that the temperature has allowed for protons and neutrons to stick together, and we get the formation of the nuclei only of the hydrogen and helium. Now this soup of matter and radiation continued expanding and cooling for another 300,000 years. Now when the temperature has dropped to 3,000 degrees, we find that electrons can bind with the nuclei and then only are atoms formed. So at this stage we find the formation of atoms. With further cooling we get the formation of molecules and the formation of gas, which is predominantly hydrogen and helium. Now this is a gaseous state, That is the initial point at which the various galaxies are going to be derived from. Now we find that as we had the formation of these molecules and gas, we have gravitational forces which come into operation. And the gravitational forces cause matter to begin to aggregate in the form of masses of gaseous molecules, forming what they call sheets of the primary galaxies, which are thousands of millions of light years across. I mean, this is phenomenal. You cannot conceive these figures. And from this we find there's a separation of these masses of primary gases nebulae, and they separated into the various galaxies and the group of galaxies, and how these were formed. Now if you look at our own solar system itself, which is the sun with its children, that is the 9 planets and the meteors, as you have mentioned earlier, we find that initially there was a rotating primordial nebular mass of gas. Now from this mass of gas, we find that the central portion condensed because of the rotation, and this condensation resulted in the formation of the sun. And we find that the surrounding nebula of gas, with the rotation of this initial mass, began to separate from this initial mass. And these masses subsequently began to aggregate and form the planets, including our Earth. Now the exact method or the exact cause for this separation is not understood. There is various theories for it, but the accepted fact is that there was this mass and there was this separation, and there's no question about that. And so we get the condensation further from gas to liquids to matter, and that's where we get the formation of the Earth. Now we may note that with the gravitational forces causing the condensation of gaseous material to form the various stars, including our sun, we find that gravitational forces are converted into thermonuclear forces, which is thermonuclear reactions. And these thermonuclear reactions are actually responsible for what, the stars shining, or the light that we see from the stars. And it is these thermonuclear reactions which resulted in the fusion of the various nuclei and gave rise to the higher metals like, oxygen and carbon and so on. And these are how the elements of the various universes come about and were distributed throughout the universe, and how they came about to be on Earth. And of course, man has been created from this dust of original creation, that is from the time of creation, which is absolutely mind-boggling. So this is very briefly then our conception of the creation of the universe as postulated from science. Let us then now go through what the Quran says. Let us compare it to science and see if there is any incompatibility, and take it from there. Brother Abdul, you started the 6 points. Let us go through them in stages then.
Okay. The first point that I mentioned, I think, was the concept of 6 periods. 6 periods of time. That is found out in Surah 7 verse 54. Allah says in the Quran, "Your Lord is Allah who created the heavens and earth in 6 days." And I've described already 6 days as meaning periods of time. There's a Quranic aspect with regard to description. How does it correlate with the scientific explanation? Do they also mention a 6?
Well, look,
phases?
as we said, there's 6 periods. Science does not specifically differentiate between the various periods. But we do know the time scale is phenomenal, because if you say that they say that the point of creation was estimated to be about 15 billion years ago, and that the earth and the sun were created 5 billion years ago. So we're talking about a phenomenal time scale going into billions of years. As regards the various stages, of course, science does not differentiate as to which stage what was created. However, one can correlate in terms of this, that the 2 phases, the stages of the creation of the heavens that Allah mentions, could relate first of all to the original creation of the gaseous matter itself from nothing, and then the second phase being the phase of separation and the actual condensation of the various galaxies and sub-galaxies, and of course the sun and the earth itself. So this is also quite in keeping and is absolutely in accordance with what science has found.
Yeah, I think Allah has specified, being the creator, obviously He knows the 6 phases. It's up to science still to discover this fact.
Absolutely.
It's up to Him. At this stage they can just say long phases of time, which obviously we see there is no contradiction. The second point that I mentioned was the concept of there being a primary nebulae. That is, initially there was the universe. Allah says in the Quran Allah says He turned to the heaven when there was smoke. So according to the Quran, the universe initially was in a gaseous stage. Now, does that contradict with science? Does science have anything to say
Absolutely
against
not.
it?
I mean, this is so beautiful and it's so amazing that the Quran could have said this 1400 years ago. I mean, no human being would have known such scientific phenomena. Indeed, we have only established this in the last century only. So this is absolutely amazing. As I described there, that the initial mass of energy being converted into the atoms and so on, and finally converted to a gaseous mass. And the origin of everything was in this gaseous mass to start with. And secondly, if we consider in principle whether we take it to be the original gaseous mass in which all the galaxies were formed, etc., or even if we take it specifically to refer to the Earth and our solar system or the heaven that we know of course we did say that the very solar system itself came into creation from a condensation of this initial mass of gas and a separation of these gases which gives rise to the Earth and the Sun. So this is perfectly in
So
accordance.
there is definitely harmony there, basically,
Absolutely,
with
absolutely.
regard to modern scientific data.
Absolutely.
All right, so those are the 2 points so far. We can see there is correlation. Let's look at the third point. Allah talks about the concept of the plurality of heavens and earth or worlds, meaning multiple heavens and multiple worlds. Obviously, what does science have to say with regard to that?
Right, just for clarification, I think we have mentioned this before, but just to put it into perspective, we know that the science says when the world was created, we got the formation of galaxies, the evidence of the various galaxies around us.
That's
You know,
right.
numbering, as we said, our galaxy only 2 billion, and then the number of galaxies being 50 billion with their own billions and billions and billions of stars.
Yeah.
So there's phenomenal amount as far as that is concerned. There's no concept about the plurality of the heavens. What about the plurality of the earth?
Yeah, that's
Here
interesting.
too, we find that we know our Earth, of course. Scientists are generally in agreement that there is no life possible within our solar system.
That's right.
But when they examine the various galaxies, or the various stars within our galaxy, for example, now they say of the 2 billion stars, at least half, which is 1 billion of these stars, show a similar pattern of motion to the sun, which is highly suggestive that it's got also planetary systems that are circulating around it. And this also, does give them an idea that there may be indeed other planets like the Earth existing in our very galaxy, not to speak about the other galaxies of which we have absolutely no knowledge as far as planets are concerned. So definitely there is a definite belief among the scientists that there is a number of other planets out there similar to the Earth which may be able to sustain life as well.
I think even if you just, as I've mentioned, if you just conceptualize the universe, you're talking about 50,000 million galaxies with millions and millions of stars with their planets. Logic determines that there has to be some kind of system similar to the one that we have in this world. All right, so we see that there is still complete harmony with regard to what the Quran has to say. The fourth point I mentioned was the so-called, the Quran doesn't define any fixed sequence or stage in the creation of heavens and the earth. Where Allah says He created the heavens and the earth in 2 periods. There was no sequential. It doesn't define specifically first the heavens, first the earth was created. So what does science say with regard to the heavens and the earth?
Sure, I think it is so beautiful, when we look at the Quran, that it chooses its words so beautifully and with such precision that we find that there is no stages mentioned, simply because if we look at the creation as described from science, we find that the actual heavens and the earth came about by a condensation of gaseous material, and there was no particular order in which it happened. They all happened simultaneously, so to speak. So there's an absolute overlapping between the development of the heavens and the sun, and the sun and the earth. And we know that both of them basically, as established by science, were created 5 billion years ago. So there's absolutely, confidence in this.
Okay, and the last point, perhaps the most interesting, is this verse which the Muslims never really understood what it meant. And this was this, I recited from Surah 50, verse 38. Let me repeat that verse. Where Allah says, we created the heavens and the earth, and what is between them. Now this what is between them, something, we never really understood it. Why don't you shed some light? What exactly Allah referring to, what is between them?
I think it's so beautiful that we find that there's so many verses in the Quran, and this, as you just pointed out as well, this is not the only one. In numerous verses we are told
Yes, I gave quite
that
a reference.
heavens and the earth and what is between.
That's right.
And there's definitely that something was created that is between the heavens and earth.
Hmm.
And this has only been found out by science in the last century, as I said.
Yeah.
We find that there is what is known as intergalactical material, that is
That's
interstellar material. Of course, there's material between the stars themselves which has been seen by science. Okay, this was one thing. But more amazing than all this is that we find that science has found that there is a large amount of what they call dark matter, which cannot be seen, but whose presence is confirmed by, sort of interfering with the photometric measurements and so on. And they have actually affirmed the existence of this dark matter between the stars which exists. And this dark matter constitutes what they say up to 90% of matter in this universe. So this is phenomenal, this interstellar creation, or as Allah says, between the heavens and the earth. And the importance of this interstellar material is so great that they say it accounts for the majority of the gravitational pull that is exerted, in this universe. And therefore, we find it is very vital. And we'll go into details about this in future programs.
It's absolutely fascinating. So we can see that there is complete, as I've described, the various things what Allah says in the Quran with regard to the creation of the heavens and the earth, the 6 stages, the initial primary nebula mass, the Big Bang, the multiple heavens and the earth, the question of interstellar, or what is between the heavens and the earth. Science today can give us a better understanding as to what Allah was referring to. So it brings us back to our original point, that to study the Quran and to study science, they are actually complementary, because scientific knowledge throws light on the Quran and is able to shed and make us understand better some of the verses which are not known before. With those few words, we'll have to end to this evening's program. We will continue this interesting aspect next week and go further into the origins and creations of the universe.
Yes, I think we haven't yet covered, the actual point of origin of the universe itself, in terms of Islam and so on. And however, we will leave, because we have given you so much food for thought, and, it is rather you digest what you have. And inshallah, next week we will come back and go on with the creation of the universe from where we have left off. So, from us in the studio, from Yusuf, Jazakallah for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
And from Abdul Kader, Assalamu alaikum, till we meet next week, inshallah.